I got the message that it's recording.
Okay. Good morning and welcome to Pro Frequency, a show that discusses issues of importance to women and their friends, produced by Creative Community League. I am Ann Babson, an award-winning New Orleans poet and president of the Women's National Book Association of New Orleans. I am here this week to help you celebrate National Poetry Month with a discussion with Alison Pelegrin, a poet whose work you ought to know if you don't already know it. Alison Pelegrin was born and raised in New Orleans. She is the recipient of a grant from the Louisiana Division of the Arts and a fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts. Alison Pelegrin's book titles evoke Louisiana and its complicated, sometimes tragic, sometimes allegorical, and often funny relationship with reality. She wrote the Zydeco tablets 20 years ago. Her collection, Big Muddy River of Stars, won the Akron Poetry Prize. After Katrina, she published Hurricane Party. Her book Waterlines came out in 2016, and her just released collection, which has blown my hair back, Our Ladies of Bewilderment, was just released by LSU Press. So welcome, Alison, to Pro Frequency, and thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me. There's nothing more I like than talking about poetry with poets, so this is perfect.
Well, and I'm not kidding when I say this book blew my hair back. Are you kidding me? This is
thank you.
Awesome. Because this is a feminist radio show, I have asked guests during Poetry Month that I'm interviewing to bring with them 4 poems that they've written that they feel honor women. And so I ask you to do that. Okay. Before we start talking about the new title, though I imagine you are reading some things from the new title, I wonder if you would read us a poem. We'll talk about it briefly. I'll ask you a question. We'll go on to the next one.
So you want me to just read those 4 poems or just read one at a time and we talk, or?
Why don't we do it one at a time and we talk a little bit, and then we'll talk about the ensemble perhaps.
Okay, well, maybe I will start with the title poem from this book, which is Our Lady of Bewilderment.
Very good.
When I turn 50, instead of a boudoir shoot, I'm having prayer cards made that feature me as my alter ego, Our Lady of Bewilderment. I'll be in yoga pants, reclining mid-swoon on the couch, completely overwhelmed as I so often am by the state of wonder buzzing in my brain. I have time to settle on my iconography, provided I do not die of my distractions. The pebbles push-pinned in my bare feet as I speed walk down hot asphalt, straining my eyes, unable to see the comet for the trees. Verso will be words, a blessing I have yet to write. I would like to write a poem about the button in my driveway, most certainly a gift from crows. I would like to formalize my blacktop beatitudes with a wine glass in one hand and a Le Pen in the other. A little bit cloister, a little bit drama queen. I'm caught between worlds, a glutton for wonder, begging for more. Nothing over the top, because I'm not searching for affliction, and I don't have a mystic's patience or time. Just a little bit of ooh and ah to jumpstart days which otherwise are uniform. Culvert steam, hornets, asphalt, a diesel wind.
That is beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for bringing us a picture that has, as you say, iconography in it, and at the same time, someone who is clearly down to earth, someone who is maybe like Shakespeare says, I confess I never saw a goddess go. When my mistress walks, she treads on the ground. Yes, exactly. Your Lady of Bewilderment is got her feet on the ground. Could you tell us briefly, because many of your poems, your readers will see if they buy Our Lady of Bewilderment, or indeed some of your other work, Our Lady of the Flood, a chapbook you produced recently. You have written a number of poems that are like a hagiography, a golden legend from the Middle Ages, only it's not your great grandma's Middle Ages saints. What's your fascination with images of women as saints?
It's almost a lifelong fascination for me. I always loved Mary. Um, and so I grew up, I mean, people in New Orleans will understand this. I was an Episcopalian, but I went to Catholic school. So in all of the ways those religions bump up against one another as being so similar, all of the Mary stuff is very separate. And I thought it was so pretty at weddings when people would go up and lay roses at the statue of Mary's feet and all of those things. I just always thought she was so beautiful and, this beautiful mother. And so I was always fascinated with images of her. And then, of course, there's an irony there because any image you see of Mary is just so opposite from the life that I imagine of that I've had. So something, I guess, was happening in my mind where I was tangling up with those gilded images and then kind of bringing them back down to earth, as you said. A lot of times when I write a poem, well, pretty much every time I write a poem, I have no idea where I'm going or what I'm doing or how I'm going to get there. And with the Our Lady poems, a lot of times that Our Lady just kind of became the vehicle that I took to get where I didn't know I wanted to go.
It's certainly encouraging to anybody who's either continues to be a worshiper of within a Christian tradition or has rejected that Christian tradition, whichever one it is, to imagine women as being able to be on planet Earth and still be connected to the sacred. That's something that I find enormously encouraging in all of your work. Would you mind reading us your second poem, please?
Oh, sure. Maybe I'll read the poem Doomsday's Daughter. This is the first poem in the book. And it speaks to the anxiety that I've also had inside my body. When I was a kid, I used to always think that Russia was going to bomb, America, specifically the house that I was living in, and to the point that I felt like I couldn't do anything. I couldn't take any action. I didn't have to clean my room because why bother? Because I thought I was going to die, that's kind of deep thoughts for a kid. Anyway, this is called Doomsday's Daughter. I've been anxious since forever, haunted by medieval premonitions and my own. Forget Barbies and babysitting. I was on the lookout for warplanes blacking out the sky. Faithful to calamity, I assumed that every day might end with a flash flood or a Category 5. When lightning struck the telephone line, I felt it in my lips. When my teeth rattled after a barge exploded on the Mississippi, I stashed my PJs in a bug-out bag. I thought darkness might descend on a day when the sky was a prism of rain and shine, but my father said it only meant the devil was beating his wife. We went for ice cream and I forgot about the questions I had for death, that moment beyond breath when the mind winds down to its halt.
I was particularly struck by the image you have of your father telling you that the devil was beating his wife when it was storming outside. Would it be inappropriate for me to ask if that were true? I know that some poets are like, it's all the image.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's true. And the weird thing about this poem is that the image or the memory that was the root of the poem didn't even make it into the poem in the final cut. And you poets know how that goes. You have to take out a lot of stuff that you thought belonged. But when I was a kid, I remember riding with my dad in the car on a Sunday. We were on the West Bank Expressway on the ground, and we were going somewhere, I don't know where, but my mom and dad were pointing out of the window and telling me to look over there. And I had no idea what they were telling me to look at. I didn't see it. I don't know if it was a bird or someone fighting in the street or a car wreck. I have no idea what it was. And so in my brain, all these things have happened over decades, but part of me is kind of always thinking about that moment, which didn't make it into the poem. But yeah, I mean, the events of the poem are true. And I mean, I know that thing about the devil beating his wife, that was like I mean, I don't know, a schoolyard type of thing too, that people used to say when it would rain and the sun is out, which if you think about it, it's a pretty horrible thing to say. But when I was a kid, I wasn't thinking about if what I said was terrible or not.
Well, I think the whole culture was trivializing incidents of domestic violence. And
Yeah, really.
sadly, to this day, too much that's true. Um, but one of the things that I find fascinating is how many poets like you share an idea in childhood of impending doom. And
Mm.
often that's because of a childhood trauma that's ongoing, perhaps the death of a parent or something like that. But I have a theory that I can't prove. Maybe you'll tell me if you agree with it or you think it's something
Okay.
else. I think that a lot of poets who have had a childhood that has made them in that way somehow kind of continually as a backdrop afraid. In a way, it has awakened their sensibilities such that they are young, although they remain young, they are also more observant and bring to their poems later cogent details that help us see the world differently in the way that a good poem might lend itself to do so. Do you think that's a reasonable theory on my part?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I don't know if that's how I would articulate it, but yeah, I agree with you. Something I touch on in these poems, and I want to touch on it more, is that feeling of being an old soul, looking out from my body with these eyes that never really seemed to fit or to match everyone else's, like they could be at a roller skating party and I was thinking of, I don't know, doom and gloom, or are these baby birds going to get their food or whatever. Like my focus was just always, I don't know, just always different. So yeah, I guess I was observing a lot of things.
I
Uh,
I was a weird kid too in that way. Not so much. I wasn't so worried about the Russians, frankly. I was worried about people much closer geographically to me doing rotten things. And
I mean, I was like, what happened? I remember asking my mother, what happens to babies that aren't baptized if you get bombed by Russia? And she's like, what? She's probably thinking, what kind of question is that? But so whatever she told me, I had this plan, and I was gonna baby. I was, if I had to, I was ready to baptize babies in mud puddles. Like it just seemed like the most important crisis thing that I could think of. So instead of being in second grade and like worrying about who has a crush on who, I was having these types of worries.
my worries were more about would the women I knew be lost to history since history recorded so few of them. I
Yeah.
really thought about that and woke up in the night screaming occasionally, and parents walked in and I said, how can we preserve things? So yeah, I was a weird kid too, is all I'm saying. And I think that it's wonderful that poets are awake to things, and that in a way this sense of doom may be liberating. Would you read us the third poem that you brought for us
Well,
that honors women?
um, I mean, maybe I can say this poem honors women because it has Madame Alexander dolls in it, but it also touches on that idea of the old soul and how we saw things when we were little. So I'll read this. It's called The Close Part. I called it the close part, my invisible way of knowing, a familiar without face or voice. The close part came and went, some nights storming with time's blood troops through my mind, and others climbing gingham's frills to get to my throat. I would have preferred to braid the hair of off-limits Madame Alexander dolls, but it watched while I pretended to sleep. Adults kept their distance like they knew I was an old soul, one who could sense lightning before it struck, but not bird shit in my ponytail. The close part called and I answered. I don't know why. One time I knelt before an electric socket, leaned in until my eyeball touched and was zapped. A wet bandana blindfold cooled my eyes. In traffic on the Mississippi River Bridge, I considered jumping, though I knew what would happen. Every bone broken, regret the long way down. Head out the window, hand on the door, the concrete a blur as the car inched along. I came this close.
It's a poem that has so much fear in it and yet so much power, I find. I love that image of you looking into the electric socket and having your eyes zapped.
I know. I don't know what was wrong with me.
No, well, I'll tell you what it reminds me of, and particularly because you're so interested in religious iconography. Before one of the prophets of the Old Testament can be a prophet, God has to put a burning coal on his tongue. Maybe your poet vision
It was on my eyes.
had to be electrified. I like the idea of that kind of almost insane curiosity of the child.
I remember it so clearly. A part of me is always there, kneeling down, getting as close to that eye socket as I could, because I thought I could see through it into something.
Maybe you did. Maybe the poem is the portal to that revelation. But would you read us your next poem that you brought that you wanted to share, please?
So this poem comes from the wonderful poem by Basho. Even in Kyoto, hearing the cuckoo cry, I long for Kyoto. And I don't know, I just think that poem really says everything. You go back to where you want to be. And when you're there, you're not really there. It's just always missing. You always have that nostalgia for it. So in my poem, I changed it up a little bit. It's called Even in Gretna, hearing the cashier talk, I long for Gretna. Coasting into my old world to help mom pack up the house she can't sell for nothing, rimmed as it is with trash and canals threatening to overflow. I get a taste for the red drink of my youth, and when the cashier at the gas station lets slip the drawl of my people, most of them scattered elsewhere or to the grave, I could sob. Peacock talk, purposely showy and slow. Anytime I'd hit the twang, mom got angry because I was letting my Gretna show. She threatened a face slap or a taste of soap, and I circled on a red bike just out of reach.
It's a very striking poem, and I notice it is in keeping with a lot of things that you do, in my view, exceptionally well. I have told other people about your work, Alison, that if all I ever knew about the swamps of Louisiana was what I read in your poems, I would want to live in one. You find the beauty in the local sound, in the local thing, whatever has been local to you, you elevate it. And that's not always an easy thing to do. And it's definitely one of the jobs that many poets have tried to do. You do it exceptionally well.
Well, thank you. I am the music of people talking down here, to me, it's a choir. It's an angel's choir singing. And so I am hyper attuned and hypersensitive to people like mocking the accent, or something that really enrages me, the subtitles that shows will use, like on Swamp People, when the Cajun people are speaking in English, and as though it's just an accent. It's a beautiful accent. And so that's kind of one of the things this poem is about. But I didn't know that you could write poems about, I don't know, gas stations and ant piles and, things that you see in your life every day. Someone had to tell me that, yeah, that is poetry. You're allowed to do that. And in my life, that person, it wasn't a poet, it was a fiction writer named Tim Gautreaux, who I know is famous in these parts. But once he kind of turned my head in that direction, and I realized what I was quote unquote allowed to do, I just was like, well, great, this is great. I will never run out of something to write about.
Yes, I think that women have been told as writers, and I would go so far as to say Southerners and people from other places that are considered regional, liminal to a more central culture, that what they experience doesn't count as quote unquote real literature, that somehow the language of mother-child relationships is less important than poems about war, that the language of the vernacular of the local person is less important than the erudite scholarly analysis of a poem that was once in Latin.
And I didn't read any of these poems, but a lot of the poems in this book have to do with some rage, almost to the point of violence. And that's something else and the reason I didn't read them is just because of the language, for the radio. I really resent being told what I can and cannot do in a poem, and it's also very dumb because I'm a stubborn person. If you tell me I can't do something, I'm immediately doing that thing. It's immature. It's to the point of immaturity. But yeah, it's really infuriating to have the world try and make you fit into some shape. And maybe you fit in that shape and maybe you don't, but poetry lets you test out those waters, which is one of the amazing things about poetry.
Yes. And one of the things that your work really captures well is the sense of the Louisiana landscape being a place of potential portent or potential epiphany, a potential revelation of some kind. It's one of the things that I think is so magnificent about this state is that people are able to tell stories that are authentic to their experience. And I have never heard so many good storytellers in one place.
It's really not fair to all of the other writers.
Yes, I joke with my friends in New York that all I have to do to be a success as a writer after having learned how to write outside of Louisiana is to come here and to ask people as they start to talk, do you mind if I record this on my phone? And that accent you were talking about of the Cajun speakers of English and of Cajun French, I have to say that when I moved here, I really didn't understand the full seriousness of that Cajun French community and how completely intact it still is. I had been told by people who had passed through Louisiana rather than lived here that people had really pretty much just given up Cajun French. And then briefly, as I was driving around the state, I got lost and had to stop at a gas station and ask for directions. And I walked in and they had some food and I was hungry. It was lunchtime. And so I bought myself like a hot dog and I sat down at a table and there were these truckers sitting next to me and they started speaking Cajun French. My French, for the listeners, is as fluent as my English, but it's the French I learned in Paris, not the French I learned here. And I started to cry because I finally said, this is in America. That
how great that happened in the gas station.
It did. Yes. Because sometimes really good things happen in gas stations.
Yeah, that's true.
But so you had mentioned the rage that you felt at times that is expressed in some of your poems, and you would avoid certain ones that had profanity. I honestly think this radio station WHIV has heard worse than your poems, but I respect your high level.
I literally thought it was like a legal thing, like as far as
I'm not sure how close the FEC is monitoring WHIV, but I have wondered if you would read a poem that I believe is clean of words that would be bleeped out on television, but nevertheless has some of that feeling. Would you read Our Lady of Whatever for us, please?
Oh yeah, I think that one's fine.
Yeah, and it also captures the sentiment that you were saying was part of your work that I think is delightful for the reader.
This is Our Lady of Whatever. I shall require a toolbox shrine with mirrored walls, stuffed with party mints and candles stoked against my legendary wrath. A target practice ace of spades with all four corners clipped and an alias worth embroidering on pillows, inking on knuckle bones. but I'm a late blooming lady, and the best names have been dealt. Our Lady of Iguanas, her reptile crown, Our Lady of Prompt Succor, New Orleans Queen, whose magic halts floodwaters at the chapel steps, Our Lady of Blind River, ghosting by pirogue to her cypress abode, Our Lady of Sorrows, heart worn outside of her body, her only joy in life to weep. So many lakes, so many ladies of the lakes. Maybe I could be Lake Pontchartrain's Lady of the Longest Bridge, Lady of Cicada tea parties, of how things used to be, or sand mandalas reduced to cerulean ash. Our Lady of Shrinky Dinks, Our Lady of Darkness who skips eclipses, Our Lady of Crash Diets and devoted avoidance of the occult, Our Lady of the Hot Flash, of fractals behind the eyes, Dia de los Deadlifts Lady, strong as a man, Our Lady of Notebook Libations, the last few pages left blank, Our Lady of Mystics who arrives without knowing why, who drifts sometimes with numbness and no purpose, her intent awakened only when she lays down to rest.
Okay, I'm trying not to have a fangirl squeal right about now. I love that poem. I love it because what you have done that speaks so much, I think, not just to me, but to other readers, is you have discovered a language that sounds like a litany of prayer, but is a prayer that a woman for whom butter would melt in her mouth could utter. It is a prayer of a real woman who is having a really bad day, who lives in a real world with Rinky Dinks, Our Lady of Rinky Dinks.
Shrinky Dinks.
Shrinky Dinks, excuse me, Shrinky Dinks. I might just need a t-shirt that said Our Lady of Shrinky Dinks with some statuary.
That actually would be an awesome t-shirt.
It would be, especially if it somehow was like a plastic Cupid doll somehow melted into a Marian figure. But you know, your merch, not mine. But what's lovely that I find your work does in very subtle ways, because I know you're a person of faith, is it tries to find ways to be inclusive of the human experience in such a way that the real person can come to the divine and the real person can have a real epiphany that is somehow relevant to the world that the person is walking in, as well as touching on to something bigger. Mm-hmm. It's a rare gift. It's a rare gift. And I hope you won't blush if I say the poet that I like the best who also does this well is John Donne. And
I'll take it. I heart John Donne. He's like my literary crush.
Yeah, except you wouldn't want to date a guy like that, would you? He seems a little bit like, you know, he'd be a hard guy to stay close with. He's very sin, repent, sin, repent, sin, repent.
Yeah,
sin,
but
repent.
I just think of that Obad, right? Like busy old unruly son, whatever it is that he says. And then also the poem, I mean, of course the sonnets, but the poem where it's something about Good Friday riding westward. It's just such a complicated construction. It's just so admirable.
Yeah, no, he is so filled with all the problems that someone who's, if he were a rap artist, would definitely have parental advisory lyrics on his rap.
And he has a mean streak, you know?
Yeah.
And I like that because I have one too. Oh. So yeah.
Well, I'll watch my step around you, Alison, then. But but I the thing that he does successfully that made him someone like, you know, atheist Ernest Hemingway admire him, is that he talks about the struggle of life to do something well, to be good, to be better than we are today, in such violent, let's say, very masculine terms. Your work is reflective of a woman's experience rather than a man's, I would say, in terms of culture and women as a political class, rather than pigeonholing you by gender. I'm saying you were raised in a country that had expectations for ladies, as did I, and we learned from that expectation what the world ought to be shaped like. And so I want to congratulate you on this new book, and I would urge readers, again, it's called Our Lady of Bewilderment. LSU Press just released it. I'm a great big fan. So, you've heard a
I'll
little
hold it
bit.
up here.
Yes, this will
It's
be
got
on
a beautiful cover with artwork by Kristen Kwan.
very beautiful cover. It looks like dandelions in an angel's crown around a woman dressed in blue.
The title of the painting is Electrons, but to me, of course, I was thinking Halo when I saw it.
No, I think it's impossible to not see
Nimbus, whatever.
some kind of saintly figure on the front. And I want to thank you for your time today. And happy National Poetry Month to you, Alison. It's weird to think of this as only a month event because,
Poetry is life.
Poetry is life, said the two poets to each other with hand to forehead. Yes.
Well, and so, I'm writer in residence at Southeastern Louisiana University, where you are my esteemed colleague. And I don't know when this is airing, but on Tuesday, April 12th at 5 p.m., a number of faculty members will be reading in the library. Everybody's going to read a poem and then talk about where the poem came from, the story behind it. So that
not unlike what we did today, a little bit.
Yes.
You could have answered my questions in a number of ways, but you certainly gave us the perspective of what led you to write these particular things from your own walking around on planet Earth. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And I look forward to seeing you at that event, but also keep your eyes peeled for Alison's book in bookstores, ladies, gentlemen, and friends of ladies and gentlemen. And thank you so much for listening today. And thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you all.